So there's been a lot of talk of the upcoming transfer window, Myles, and again, there's been some interesting chat around Villa. What do you think of it so far?
There has to be interesting chat around Villa, Dave. We are an interesting side. No, it was always going to be a big summer, wasn't it? Getting into the Champions League, there's obviously a lot of work to be done to add some depth to the squad. They've moved early in bringing back Barkley, which I think is a really smart bit of business, really, because 5 million is nothing for a player like him in this market right now. He knows the club. We've had him before. He had a fairly decent time at Villa, maybe a bit inconsistent, but I think it's safe to say he's developed as a player since then as well. And I think that adds depth in an area that Villa really needed it, because we saw last season there are times where Kamara was out injured and we're still not going to have him back till October. And then McGinn picked up his suspension and we just looked so light all of a sudden. So depth in that area is really key. And it looks like we're not done when it comes to like a midfield rebuild, doesn't it?
I think that's quite clever, though, with the Ross Barkley move, to be honest. And I've seen a bit of chatter. I don't know how much substance is behind it, to be honest, in terms of all these financial potential punishments, whether that's actually a thing. But it's been murmured, hasn't it, for a couple of months now. And I've seen something about whether they've got to sell a player by the end of June, and I don't know whether that's what's behind all this Douglas Luiz talk to Juventus.
Yeah, it has to be, because otherwise none of it makes sense to me, I'll be honest. The thing is, there's talk about financial restrictions on every club right now. Like, maybe we're due the quietest transfer window in football history, because it seems like everyone's hamstrung with how much they can spend. And I think what we'll see is a lot of the kind of plays that Chelsea made, where they spread things out over long contracts. Maybe they look at swap deals and things like that. And obviously that's something that's being touted with Villa right now. Part of this midfield rebuild might be getting a bit of cash and Weston McKennie for Douglas Luiz. And I've said on here before, I never want to question anything that the club are doing right now, because they've got everything right so far. And I do have full faith in them to make whatever they need to work. But figures of, like, I think Juventus' first bid was 25 million and Weston McKennie for Douglas Luiz. Now, that is scandalous if that's something they take. Because if you think about the central midfield market, think about the money that Caicedo went for, the money that Rice went for. They were playing at Brighton and West Ham and were standout players there of a fairly similar age profile and almost like a similar sort of position as well. And Luiz is coming from a side that's just got into the Champions League, is young, is a Brazil international, and was undoubtedly one of the best centre midfielders in the Premier League last year. So if they're commanding fees of 100 million in this market, then Luiz has to too, no matter what financial struggle Villa might have. And McKennie being part of that deal was really interesting, because Villa have been linked with him for 3 seasons now. He came over to Leeds. It didn't work for him then. He's gone back to Serie A last season, and he has had an incredible season for Juventus. I think he's played incredibly well and shown why they signed him in the first place. I'm not opposed to having him join the Villa squad, but that deal doesn't make sense to me, because it's not strengthening. We need depth and we need to strengthen if we really want to kick on.
The thing is, it's not really massively improving your financial situation as well, if you're only getting
it's not enough.
A small amount of money extra. And I've seen borderline outrage on social media over this rumour.
So this is the reason that stuff like this makes no sense, and why so much of the financial regulations need to be looked at. It does help them financially, because it won't be a straight swap like it sounds like. What it will be is Juventus will pay 65 million for Douglas Luiz, and we'll pay 40 million for Weston McKennie. And then what that means is we bank the whole 65 million on this year's books, and we spread the cost of McKennie out over the next 4 or 5 years, however long his contract is. So it looks really profitable this year. But that doesn't make that's not how business works. It doesn't make any financial sense logically. And I still don't think it's the right move.
I don't know whether you're actually gaining the upper hand there, though, because you're almost kind of doing that to appease Juventus just so they can financially afford this transfer.
Because they've got no money.
They can't afford it either.
Yeah, so they've got no money.
In a way, it's bad for both clubs, for me.
Do you know what this deal screams of? When Villa were looking at bankruptcy when they were in the Championship and Tottenham offered 4 million and Josh Onuma for Jack Grealish. Like, that's what this feels like again to me. It feels laughable. The funny thing is, Monchi apparently has been in talks with Juve over quite a few players, and one of them that was mentioned was Federico Chiesa. And a lot of Villa fans would jump at the opportunity to bring someone like that in. There is definitely a deal to be done, and that kind of worries me because I'll be honest, I don't want Luiz to go. He had such a sensational first half of the season last year. The second half was not as good, but obviously Kamara was missing and all of a sudden he was fulfilling a different role. But he is undoubtedly like a phenomenal central midfielder of a great age profile who should be one of the things that we build this next generation of Villa around, and what helped us get to the Champions League should be what carries us through to consistency in it. I really do hope that we hold on to him.
I think when you look at it, I think it's difficult. He's got this real cult following at Villa. You know, he's absolutely loved by the fans. But then you analyse that team and that squad, and you look at what players are worth what. He's at a stage in his career now. You know, he's in his prime. There are certain players that he can't afford to lose. You know, Ollie Watkins, Leon Bailey. If you are looking to make some money off of one of those players, can you see why they might be looking at Douglas Luiz?
Yeah, I think I said that before, that actually, as much as I would hate to see him go, it's one of the ones that does seem most logical if you get the right deal. Because Villa did really well at bringing in a Luiz replacement last summer and bedded him in really carefully. Like Tielemans, we got him free, let's not forget. So getting big money for Luiz makes sense. And we've seen clubs do that. Look at the model of Brighton, West Ham did it with Rice. Look at when Leicester used to do it successfully. Have a replacement ready, sell for a huge fee, bed the new player in, and you're done. And that would make a lot of sense. So as much as I love Luiz and hope that he stays at Villa, selling him for big money, I've got no qualms with. That's necessary for a club's development because I trust us to bring the next one through. I think there are other players that we could shift that would bring us money in. And even if it's not transfer fees, it's removing wages. Like, we still got to get Coutinho off the books. Luka Dean probably will move on. There's talk of Jacob Ramsey being sold, which would be a real shame, but because of his injuries and the emergence of Morgan Rogers, isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world. And there's big interest in John Duran as well, who I think we could bring quite a big fee in, considering we only bought him a short while ago. So there's moves to be made, plus the new sponsorship deals, plus the Champions League money. I don't think it's as desperate as people think. If we need to sell Luiz, I understand, but we should be commanding a huge fee. And particularly when they're talking about part of this midfield rebuild being bringing Conor Gallagher in now. Like this, we're clear favourites right now. A brilliant move, actually. I'd be really, really happy with it. I think he's an excellent footballer. I think he's got a great engine. I think he brings a lot to any side. I think there's still raw pieces of his technical ability that need improving, but who better than Unai Emery to do that? Like I mentioned Morgan Rogers a second ago. He was playing championship football this season. He came in under Emery, took a little while to get off the ground, and then all of a sudden looked sensational because that coach is there. And I think he'd have the same sort of impact on Gallagher. But the talk is 50 million. So if you can afford 50 million on Gallagher, why are we taking a cut price deal for Luiz? I think you've got to negotiate that far, far higher if you're going to do it.
Yeah, and I think you look at what he's done with John McGinn since he came in as well, who, let's be honest, was had a little bit of struggling form. You look what he's done for his game. I think he'll be perfect for Conor Gallagher. And you look at his form towards the end of the season, especially for Chelsea, you can see why they're interested. I know he's had a bit of stick, hasn't he, over the time, where he's good enough and at that level. But I think he's definitely shown promising signs that he is.
Yeah, and whatever happens, I do stand by the idea that in Unai we trust and he will get it right. And as long as we can fill that squad out more and give it the depth that it needs to compete, then whatever needs to happen, needs to happen. As long as, you're right, as long as we don't lose someone like Watkins, Bailey, Martinez, there is always the next generation. We couldn't fathom the idea of losing Jack Grealish a while ago, and we've just completely outperformed anything we were ever capable of with him in the squad. So we could move on from Douglas Luiz. But what Villa need to start doing is being smart in the market consistently. And if you're watching clubs sell their prize assets for massive amounts of money, don't settle and take nothing. It's not been that long since he signed a new deal, let's not forget.